Hi, welcome back to Deep Images, and we are continuing our cycle on vampires. By the time you see this, Halloween will have passed. But vampires, are exciting all year round. Well, first of all, I'm Henry Cover, by the way. And second of all, Rhiannon Clark here is my wonderful co-host. And third of all, please like and subscribe because we need the support. We really got to get it going because the channel's growing and we're excited. Um, I want to talk about a film that used is kind of a classic, a cult classic film that I knew about for many years, and I just never got the opportunity to really see properly until 2017. And but I heard about it as early as 1992, I think. And it's called The Blood Spattered Bride. Uh, I'm going to pronounce this word right. I think I will pronounce it right, but I don't want to miss any syllables. The real name of the movie. The movie it was named in its native language, it was made in Spain. So the film is called La Novia
You,
Ensangrentata, and which means the blood spatter bride, and it's directed by Vicente Aranda, and I haven't really seen any of his other films. Well, I have seen one called Exquisite Corpse, which was kind of like a giallo. There were Spanish giallos, and they were a lot like the Italian giallos. We've covered some of them on the channel before, like Eloy de la Iglesia is one of my favorites. We've covered some of his, but Aranda kind of dabbled in that field too. But he went on to do like other dramas, and he covered a lot of intense subject about sexuality apparently. And then in 1990, he made a film with Victoria Abril, who was one of Pedro Almodovar's favorite actresses, and called Amantes, which is Lovers, and he won a bunch of Goya awards. So, that's the Oscar there. So, and think of the images that Goya conjured, and compare it to the Oscar. I mean, if we were like from Spain, we would have like an H.R. Giger statue, you know,
hmm hmm
but we're not. So anyway, he won the Goyas, and yeah, he had a big career. And one day I'll track down some of his other films, but I really enjoyed this one. Um, it was shot by a photographer I like, Fernando Arabas. Yeah, he also did a lot of cool stuff, and he shot a bunch of giallos and spaghetti westerns um, that I have seen. And there's a lot of crossover because a lot of these were Italian French co-productions. So Bloodspatter Bride, in this one, this is an adaptation of Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, and we recently covered Lamora on here. Francis Chu went into great detail about Sheridan Le Fanu and her collection of stories in a Glass Darkly, and the story Carmilla, which is like the blueprint of all the lesbian vampire stories and movies, of which there continue to be many. But the 1970s was truly a massive wave of them. Um, so this one is one of the ones that caught a lot of attention and had a lot of influence on the international scene. In America, uh, the export title of this movie, which has been shed a long time ago, thankfully, so I never remember it. But it was "Till Death Do Us Part," and then "Frenzy of Blood," and it was shown in drive-ins as "Frenzy of Blood" in a double feature with this film called "I Dismember Mama," and th- they had
That's
an
a fun
ad.
name.
They had an ad campaign that was a faux news reporter on the scene at the theater talking to people who just came out, and they're like, I was throwing up, and oh my God, and they show a person having a seizure and like having like a psychotic break, and they wanted people to believe this was real, and it was not
hmm
real. They were one of the first. They were in that era of grindhouse exploitation films that did a lot of those stunts, and they were one of the first that did that specific one. A lot of people did the barf bag and things like that, but the whole thing about like it driving you insane, and like you
The
had to
movie
stop
is so
picture.
crazy, so intense that this is what's going to happen to you if you watch the film. I love that. It's hilarious. It's a
Yeah,
great ad.
sometimes they had to sign an approval, beforehand or whatever. If you can make it through both movies with your sanity. Um,
Mhm.
but really, I Dismember Mama is a kind of a gory exploitation movie. Totally weird, Bill, because this movie is totally classy. I mean, it is very graphic, but it's not like a sadistic gore fest. It's not like a Herschel Gordon Lewis type of movie or Blood Sucking Freaks. It's a classy Spanish film. Um, and basically it's kind of a low key what people would call a slow burn, which some people say slow burn and they mean it in an insulting way. Other people use it defensively, like if somebody goes, "Well, I don't know about that movie, man. Nothing happened for an hour," and then you like the movie, and you might go, "Well, it's kind of a slow burn," and Dwayne Cochran, our producer, and Chuck, our co-host, were talking about this on YouTube recently. I mean, in the comment section about is slow burn a compliment or an insult? It's like kind of depends. Um, I guess in this context, if I were trying to get someone to watch it that I thought maybe didn't have the greatest attention span but might enjoy it, then I would say it's a slow burn, and maybe they would go,
Maybe a slow burn might be very painful for somebody with ADHD, perhaps.
it could be. I mean, no, it's not. Now, as a movie, it's not that slow. I mean, I do watch movies
Yeah,
that slow, but this isn't one of those. But for a lot of younger people who do have ADHD and in general have gotten attuned to like video games and things, it may seem slow. They may be impatient, and that most of them are going to grow out of that. Some people
but
won't.
it's also okay to actually watch films, I think, that are slow burns to
Oh, I
enjoy
agree.
them. It's
I
actually
agree.
amazing to enjoy a slow burner,
Yes. And this film I have
So yeah.
seen probably a total, I didn't mean to talk over you, I apologize. This film I have seen maybe a total of 15 times as of tonight. And this viewing and one I did the other day to prepare for the show really is the deepest viewings I've done of it in
Mhm.
all this time. Where I've watched and I watched the Spanish version because I usually watch the English version and it's above average dubbing, but the Spanish version is much better. The lines are delivered much better, and the subtitles, they're translated accurately and they're more poetic. Whereas some of those, if you watch the English version with the English subtitles, they're not matching each other. Like the English is using a colloquialism, or paraphrase, but the actual subtitles are what was made for the Spanish script, and that's what they're really supposed to be saying. So sometimes you lose some of that flavor. Um,
Of course, yeah.
and yeah, so I watched the Spanish version, and now I've gotten kind of absorbed in it, and thought a lot about the whole Carmilla thing, and I've been into lesbian vampire movies, not as a fetish or a sexual thing. Some men are, well,
Mhm.
a lot of women in horror community are definitely into it as a sexual fetish. Um, uh, Dated a couple, but the for me though, it's a fascinating genre, and we touched on a lot of the stuff with the session we did with Francis, um, and I think I wanted to kind of continue, and this is kind of an opportunity to kind of explore those themes with me and Rhiannon, and my thing flashed, and so this film, it is an adaptation of Carmilla, which is like, I'll be honest, I've not read Carmilla the story all the way through. I flipped through it, the Criterion edition, which I own, is super
Mhm.
deluxe. How thick this is. So this is the Blu-ray, which has like a million extras, plus two different versions of the movie, and it has a booklet with essays, and it has the entire story Carmilla in it. So there's no excuse for me not to have read it, but as I understand it, it is that archetype of the kind of innocent or quasi innocent young woman uh, who has having some kind of tension with men. Who's playing the social role of a heterosexual mate or partner. A lot of times in these stories, adaptations, they're newlyweds. Almost always they're newlyweds, and they haven't had
Mhm.
sex yet. And then in this story and some other movies of that nature, like Daughters of Darkness, that's exactly how the movies begin. Is they're coming back from their wedding and then they're going up to the honeymoon phase. Um, and this story is no different. And basically, they've just adapted it into the modern day. And I think for the time it came out in a then repressive country like Spain, and just that whole era of women's lib, everything coming out of the West, it struck a nerve. I didn't really know it had a tremendous influence, but the more I researched it over the years, and then I was like, God, I need to really see this. So when Mono Macabro put a definitive Blu-ray of Blood Spatter Bride, I jumped at it. So So to be clear, the story Carmilla, which is in that Criterion edition, is what this movie's based on. But Vampire is based on other stories in that same collection of short stories by Sheridan Le Fanu. It gets a little confusing. So Vampire and Blood Spatter Bride are kind of like siblings, sort of.
Hmm.
But so in this one, Susan, some of the characters have no names. There are only five speaking parts in the whole movie. Susan is played by Maribel Martin, who was a child actress in Spain, and she's really just breathtakingly beautiful. I mean, it's kind of like just one of those just stunning, and very much of that time with the very long, straight brunette hair and just the very fresh, kind of natural, earthy kind of look, and just very
Hmm.
lustrous features, very European. And she did during this period a couple of other horror movies. I was trying to remember them because I didn't. There were ones that I have actually seen. This movie sandwiched kind of in between them. And let me see, The House That Screamed or La Residencia, which is a good horror film from '69, and then A Bell from Hell, which is an even better one from 1973. So in between those in '72, she made this. Now, when she made this movie, which was not her, it was her third feature film. She was only 17, and
Hmm.
she turned 18 around the time the movie was actually released. So nowadays, with the kind of material that's in this movie, if it were made in America and that was the case, everybody would protest online and have a fit. So, but this is a different culture, different time, So
Yeah. So those rules don't apply to you now.
yeah. They did right, exactly. So if you go, in other words, if you go into it with a modern mindset, which most people who are into these kind of movies do not, but if you happen to, then try to modify it and have an open mind and understand that, instead of just instantly
Mm.
boycotting it, which is usually what people do on the internet. They just reactively boycott it without
Well,
experiencing it.
like Jodie Foster, for example, in
Well,
Taxi Driver.
that's a more clear cut example though. She was a lot younger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a lot younger, but like, look at that amazing like
Oh, I know.
performance she gave.
Oh yeah, I'm with you.
Fantastic, and like Juliette Lewis and Cape Fear.
Yeah.
Um, just so like, acting is acting as well. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the problem. People who want to reflexively boycott, censor, and destroy films, uh, I've come to the conclusion they literally can't distinguish fiction from reality.
Mm.
And one of the things that we've said many times on this show in the past, not real recently, but is it's fiction. Get over it. It's fiction.
It's not real.
It's
Yeah.
right. It's not real. And in this day and age, and, with cinema being a storytelling medium for fiction for 130 years almost, why do we need to keep saying this or reminding people? It shows to me that society, well, I feel this anyway. Society is losing its grip on what is real and what isn't, and
Hmm.
that's fine, but don't burn my movie.
Of course, of course. Don't like, yeah, look, yeah, leave art alone. Leave art alone.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I just want to those are some details that are interesting, some of which I did not know until recently. I didn't know her exact. I thought she was 18 when she made it, but she was 17 and then turned 18. But yes, she's of course totally nude through quite a lot of the movie and totally clothed in other parts of the movie. Um,
Mhm.
but the beginning of the movie, they're at the head honeymoon. She's married to an unnamed husband, played by actor Simon Andrew, who I haven't seen a lot of his roles, but he does have a great career. He was in a lot of Spanish giallos too, and a lot of prestige movies. And incidental to recent episode of our show, he was at an older age in Beyond Reanimator. So that it was like the third Reanimator movie. Because Rihanna just did a giant thing on Reanimator that's doing really well,
Yeah, love that.
and yes, they did a great job. And so Simon is the husband, and in the English version, it's easy to see him as kind of a insensitive, tyrannical, maybe abusive person because it's very brusque, his voice. But if you watch the Spanish version, it's much more modulated, and it's like really, and again, this is something that uh is weird because a lot of people during that period unless they were very permissive or sexually experimental, they would feel like, well, if you're, having rough sex or being aggressive towards the woman and you're role playing and somebody, an observer, like in the movie, we're all observing it, we're all voyeurs, would think they're abusing them or whatever, and they're not. But see, my generation was brought up to believe that all of that is violence against women and that women don't enjoy anything like that. So I have learned from many personal experiences in the last 20, 10, 15 years and my friends that no, that's not the case. A lot of women enjoy it.
Consensual. It has to be
Yes, it's
consensual. But
consensual.
women, if it's consensual, yes,
And
women
when
do
and
enjoy
the thing is when it's
this. Yeah.
consensual, but someone else is saying it's wrong, that's not their business. Again, we're going into the whole thing with
Yeah,
art.
that's
Same with the
judgment. That's
bedroom.
sexual judgment.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's that element in this movie that also might make some modern thinking people uncomfortable, but you're not sure. What's interesting, I thought, was the first few times I watched the movie, I just saw it as he's pushing her. He's really horny. She's a virgin and he just can't get his hands off her. And of course, she's casting an actress that beautiful and young and then taking all her clothes off every 5 seconds. And the camera just loves her. And so it's bringing home that fact, that lust element. And so are you supposed to feel bad that the husband wants to have sex with his wife a lot? Well, I think no. But I think it's how you treat somebody and if it's consensual or not. And rereading scenes, it seems like most of the early ones that I originally took as kind of overly pushy or overly aggressive are consensual. And what the clue is right in front of you all the time because when they go on their honeymoon and they get in the hotel, the husband goes to check in with the guy, and she get the stuff they brought, their packages and luggage. She goes to the room in her bridal gown and a man breaks in and rips all her clothes off again, super close up, and rapes her. Now, first time you watch this movie, especially if you cut off the movie there, you're going to think that really happened. It did not really happen. It was similar to Louis Buñuel's scenes in Belle de Jour, where Catherine Deneuve has those kind of fantasies. Again, a movie where a woman can enjoy sadomasochism. That was from 1967, great year, and that kind of helped. Actually, that was also a Spanish director, Louis Buñuel. Um, but it's that similar kind of thing. It's a fantasy of her, so we don't like seeing it, but
Hmm.
it's in her head. So who are we to judge? What she gets off on. It's not like there's a man really raping her. So then her husband comes in, and yes, it does seem everything seems good. He gets progressively more rough and more persistent, and most of it's within the bounds of what men are like. I mean, just one way or another. Um, but there are times over the course of it where he does something like that, and he seems a little cruel, like he's picking on her, and then she seems tense. But then all of a sudden, she just yields, almost yields like this, like she does in her rape fantasy.
Surrenders to his
Yes, and just
to his
let
desires.
and their expression is hard to gauge. Some of it, sometimes I look at it and I see it as she's like, "Okay, I'm just gonna give in to this, fuck it." And other times I'm thinking she's like, "Yeah, bring it on. The game is afoot." And it's like
Hmm.
it's hard. I think it depends a lot on what you bring into the movie, and maybe they intended it that way. Um, but he does have a rough side, and they are trying to drive home that whether it's right or wrong, or he's a good guy or a bad guy, there are forces out there that hate all men. And unfortunately, our villainess in this movie, our antagonist, is one of those forces. So that's Carmilla. So Carmilla is actually her real name. It was Markilla Karnstein, and she was a nobleman noblewoman, excuse me, a few centuries ago. And she's the ancestress of our husband, unnamed husband. We're at the hotel in the beginning where the viewer believes she might be raped, but it's a fantasy. She says, "I want to leave." Now, see, that also threw me off the first time because I thought maybe she was raped, and then she's like, "I want to get out of here," but no. So they do leave, and then they go to this ancestral house. It's kind of like a manor. It's not a huge castle, but
Hmm.
apparently he's inherited it in some way or another. So you're getting into the gothic horror kind of trope. And Markella Karnstein was his ancestress. She supposedly poisoned her husband. Um, and hated men. And basically, what they did is there's like a tomb underneath the castle where her ancestors are buried, and there's also paintings in the house of the ancestors, but only of the male ancestors. And so Susan, the wife, the main character, is like, what? Asks this young girl, Carol, who is
Hmm.
the daughter of the servant. She's a key character too. Uh, why is this? Because it seems kind of sexist, right? And she's like, the women's portraits are in the attic. I mean, are in the basement, in the vault or whatever. And she's like, hmm. Yeah, she doesn't make a big deal about it, but then she's kind of like pondering. So these kind of seeds are planted as you go along in between this kind of thing with and her husband's sexual antics or whatever. And you learn that in this subterranean whatever it is, I'll just call it a crypt for lack of constant synonyms. I keep wanting to call it a basement, but it's a little classier than a basement, but not much. But in this underground crypt, uh, there is a painting of Michaela Karnstein, and it says she was born 1767, and it doesn't have a death date on it, which no one comments on. But of course, we the viewer are and her face has been cut out. So it's read by the husband character and the little girl Carol that basically, she was considered, evil by the family. They basically kind of not only did they bury her down there, they kind of like want to bury her memory because she was so evil to the other Karnsteins. And so there you have that kind of percolating legend, this little mystery, like this kind of Countess Bathory kind of thing going on. So occasionally there's this woman, this blonde woman, uh, who sees them, and occasionally she catches Susan's eye, and Susan's, you know, playing it very cool, but the woman is seemingly shadowing them, or how, stalking them, or whatever term you want to use. It Talking wasn't the term back in 1972, but anyway, and so every time it throws her off a little bit, and her husband notices it, he's like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And she's like, "Oh, nothing." Like she doesn't want to know him to know that she's like checking out another woman, or she doesn't want to know a woman's stalking them, and whatever. She doesn't want him to know for whatever. You don't know what her reasons are. She's kind of
Hmm.
she's kind of an opaque character, and yet in other ways she's kind of an open book. But um, and so finally, this insane plot twist goes by where the husband, who by this time you have some sympathy for, because he's gotten a doctor to treat Susan, an unnamed doctor played by Dean Selmier, who played in a lot of Spanish movies like Glass Ceiling by Eloy de la Iglesias. Really cool guy, and he plays the doctor. He's kind of the he's kind of the hero sort of that they throw into the movie that you hope is going to get to the bottom. It's kind of like in Psycho when they get Martin Balsam to go into the house, and you're like the whole movie, Norman's been killing everybody and nobody knows about it. There's nobody to save anybody. So the detective, what's his name,
Figures it
Argos.
out.
Yeah, he
Hmm.
comes in, and when I first saw it, I'm like, oh yeah, he's gonna save them, and that's a trope that's used in a lot of horror movies too. But in a lot of horror movies, they do upset your expectations, and like in Psycho, that was the first one where it's like, no, Arbogast, no, doesn't survive to save them.
Mm.
um so in the case of this doctor, he hangs out a lot with the husband, and they chat about the castle and the curse, or the alleged curse, and just the history, and about the wife's psychological issues in her dreams. She has described them, and actually, she had described the woman in her dreams to this artist that the doctor brought. And so it's this nice portrait. Then uh, finally, they meet. Well, the husband meets this girl. The way he meets her is very strange. He goes out on the shore and he sees something in the sand, and it's kind of like a lump there. And then he notices coming out of the lump is like a snorkel, that you use, for scuba diving.
Oh
And
no way.
then he sees two human eyes staring through it, and then everything else is covered with sand. Well, then you see the little snorkel thing coming out for the breath, after he
Hmm.
uncovers it. So obviously that's how this person survived. Understand, but you don't know why they did that. Was it
Hmm.
an art experiment, or is it why would they? Obviously, they didn't want to die doing it. Um, And so when he starts uncovering it, he realizes it's a woman, and then she's totally naked. And there's a lot of little like he starts taking the sand away, and I don't think it's deliberate at first, but he kind of the first thing he bumps into is her bare breasts, but then he kind of doesn't stop as soon as most guys would. And uncovers the other one. And that's this
It's
is
like,
this is actually very important foreshadowing to the end of the film, believe it or
mhm,
not. Um, and so he's like, "Let me get you some clothes." And he doesn't treat her bad or anything. He doesn't express any outward lust for her. It's just those actions are kind of like, hmm. And so but he has no interest. He really has no interest in her romantically or sexually. He only does in his wife. And whether he treats her perfectly or not, that's a whole nother element of the story. So he takes this nude woman home, and she says her name is Carmilla. And what's her face? Susan draws a picture of her. And so apparently Susan and the doctor's friend are both artistically gifted. It's probably the same artist that the director hired to do the portraits. But in this case, she's trying to draw her. And you're thinking, why is she drawing her? But I think, I as an artist who have drawn people, especially have drawn women, I know it's often
mhm.
like they become your muse, or you see them as your muse, or you want to draw them because you're attracted to them, you want to capture their beauty. And that's exactly
Why am I thinking about the Titanic now?
yeah, Jack. And that's how this is. It's like
Yeah.
it's real
Mm.
calm, but if you but you look at Carmilla's expressions and she gets it. She's like, like thinking like this chick is into me. She's drawing my portrait. And she seems very calculating. Not really evil yet, but just very like, and I want this woman. And so the portrait looks exactly like the woman in her dreams, of course. And finally, the husband becomes convinced after the wife starts reading a lot of occult books and books about dream interpretation and all this kind of stuff. First, he dismisses it, of course, but then a good plot point. A lot of movies of that period, the guy would have never believed her to the end, contrary to all evidence of senses. Like in Candyman or something, where you're like, can't you tell this is supernatural? Wake up. Um, but he does kind of come around, and he's just kind of like going to deal with the situation. He doesn't say a lot about it, but the exposition comes out when him and the doctor have these conversations. Then they have two, and one key one is he gets up the courage to tell the doctor, "This is the same woman that's my ancestor. Carmilla
Interesting.
is Mircalla Karnstein." He's not getting into she's trying to take my wife away from her. He still hasn't figured that out. He still doesn't see, he's blind to that, but he does has kind of forced himself to believe based on all the circumstantial evidence that somehow she is immortal. And they don't use the word vampire, they don't suggest she's a vampire, and they don't even use the word immortal, but he's like they're the same person.
Let me get this straight. So this lady, um, the husband thinks that the vampiress is his ancestor, and he isn't thinking about the fact that there might be a sexual relationship between
No, he
the
did
pair. He's just obsessed with that
but I
his
think
connection with her at
I think that
first.
yeah, it's like that's another symptom of the fact he's not sensitive to the woman's needs. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah,
know what I'm saying? He's got tunnel
yeah,
vision. He just
yeah.
assumes, oh, my wife is into me. She would never be attracted to women. And a lot of men are like that. And a lot of them are correct, but sometimes they're not correct. And it's always nice to ask your woman, try to find out how she feels about it. It'd be nice. But he's not that kind of guy, and so he concentrates more on the mystery, and she wears these rings, and she wears them backwards. So the metal part's here, and all of the jewels are here, and it's a really
Interesting.
cool scene. And she, Susan says, "Why do you wear them like that?" She said, "I want to always feel like I am holding something." And
Oh,
in the painting, she's the character Mikala, whose face was cut out, is holding the rings, and they find the cutout face, and it is identical to both portraits. So that's when the husband goes to the doctor and says, "This is weird, too much for a coincidence." And the doctor says, "Look, I'm not judging you, basically, but I don't really believe it. I'm highly skeptical." And but they don't get an argument or anything. It actually is a kind of atypical. Kind of it's like they both have kind of a wait and see what happens kind of attitude. Like he's one's a believer, one's the other non-believer, but they're agreed that they're going to both wait and see what happens. So unfortunately, they don't see some of the important things happening, and one of the major is that Carmilla finally does seduce Susan, and she does bite her and suck her blood. She doesn't turn her into a full vampire, but she does get her to the point where she's in her thrall.
Okay.
It's not obvious at first, but then what becomes obvious is when the husband goes back to playing these kind of, S&M kind of flirtatious, rough sex games or trying to initiate them, and she's like, no, she keeps turning him down cold. She doesn't do the yielding thing or the engaging thing. She's just like, no, and I gotta say, for the kind of character he is, he takes it pretty well. Uh,
Hmm.
but it's not too long before he does start to realize that, oh, but she is into Carmilla. And Carmilla has this incredible, she's kind of just, your basic, she's British actress, by the way, Alexandra Abastedo. And she apparently was in a character in one of the lead characters in a popular British spy series in the 60s. I forgot the name of it, but and then she went on to become an animal rights activist and a notorious vegetarian in the 70s, which, more power. She was a founding, she was a early proponent of vegetarianism in Britain. And but this is like unlike her other roles, but she's very just kind of, very pretty, slim, blonde, and but she wears, besides the rings, which are ostentatious, she takes to wearing this diaphanous, see-through robe, kind of like what I'm wearing, like a hoodie with the hood up,
Hmm.
and it's lavender, and it's just
Ooh,
stunning.
beautiful.
Um,
Nice
and
fashion.
oh, and the color lavender becomes like their color, her and Susan, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
because within a couple of scenes, somehow Susan now is, she might have already had it with her, but somehow Susan has manifested a lavender nightgown, not see-through, but still, and they're kind of like starting to skip through the woods. I'm kidding. They're not really skipping. They're just walking calmly. But, they're definitely, you get like Susan's like kind of falling in love with her, and Carmilla is not overly pushy. She's not violent, but you know, yet things just kind of simmer. So that's why I said it's kind of a slow burn movie. So we're like way into the second act, going into the third act before all these things kind of start to come to a same juncture point. And what happens is earlier in the film, I neglected to say this because it's not really part of the plot, but it is an incredible scene. It's one of her dreams. That's when she saw Carmilla, the woman in her dreams, who she later realized was Carmilla. And the woman in her dreams and her kill her husband, and it's extremely graphic and bloody. I mean, really, and it's fairly early in the movie, and then the movie calms down again for a while. But since it's a dream, the characters kind of dismiss it. But that a lot of the stills I've noticed for this movie use these iconic images of Susan holding this incredible wavy dagger that they have, that's a Karnstein dagger, and just tons of blood everywhere. And I always thought that was actually what happens in the movie. Now there are some utilizations of the dagger as we go along,
Hmm.
but that particular one of that much graphic violence and the death of her husband is just in a dream. But the images are very powerful. You're like, wow. I mean, they're like sadistic. That actress like getting into it. She's just like into it. And so by this time where I left off before, third act, she's starting to feel that way. And actually, Carmilla is kind of hypnotizing her and asking her to recite after her these very poetic verses. And basically, part of it is like, I hate him. He has defiled my body. He has taken who I am, my identity. I'm paraphrasing. They're much more poetic. I was going to write some of them down, but beautiful stuff. And she also talks about herself, like, the ecstasy of death and, all this kind of things. Like, she's kind of hinting she's a vampire. You already kind of know that, but she's kind of giving you more hints that she's immortal, that she's been this rodeo before with seducing, other people, making them immortal. And she's persuading him now, that okay, he is an abusive husband. He is scum. All men are scum. He must die. And so that's her dream. She already had that dream like way earlier. And now she's
Hmm.
like, oh my God, So you kind of feel like that's the way it's going to go. But the doctor discovers uh, them in one of their, they have a weird ritual where Carmilla recites even more kind of abstract poetic verse. It is like an occult ritual. It's very brief. It's not elaborate, but they enter the lavender, and then one of them strips down, and she recites this stuff, and they embrace, and they do exchange blood. I think. Oh yeah, because Susan cut her hand in one of the scenes, so she takes off the bandage and she gives it to Carmilla, and that's like the
Hmm.
climax of the ritual is Carmilla sucking, and when she comes up, I mean, her with the blood on her lips and the lavender hood is just killer image, and well, the doctor sees all this, so he's thinking, okay, well, all right, it's true. Unfortunately, they quickly notice that he's noticing them, and so
Yep.
they confront him with that special dagger. And the dagger was a point in the movie because where it was a point, like a subplot, is that it kept appearing and disappearing, and a lot of it was that little girl Carol was supposedly hiding it and things, and you don't really know who has it, what is it, but you come to realize that it's Carmilla's dagger. It's like a ceremonial dagger intended to kill people, and it's ancient like the Karnsteins. That's why it's this really cool design, and like a human sacrifice implement. And so they use it on the doctor. It's not nearly as bloody as the dream was, but it's still, yeah. Well, the doctor did have backup. He knew this guy who's an unnamed character, a bit player, and I'm not sure if he was a hunter or if he was, and because he's in the woods a lot, I'm not sure if he was in law enforcement in some way. They never explained any of that. But basically, the doctor had called him and had kind of real quickly told him some of these suspicions, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, so after they kill the doctor, the two women are run away. They're going to go be happy ever after. But Carmilla gets stuck in a bear trap. So she's actually not strong enough. I guess she doesn't have enough blood. She's not strong enough to open it by herself. So she tells Susan to just leave. Run away, leave me here. I'll somehow get through because she can't really be killed by this. She's might have to lose a foot for a while. But then that hunter comes upon her and he's like, I found you. And here again you get a
Hmm.
character who's like, this guy's gonna save the day. And he's got a shotgun and he's got rope and he's like, I'm gonna tie you up first
Hmm.
and you know, I'm gonna avenge my buddy. Well, Susan is behind him with the dagger, and not only does she stab him a lot, then when he's down on the ground, then she takes his shotgun and blows his face apart. Even though it's not really apart, it's just covered with blood. But at that range that she shoots, it should have been like in fragments, but they probably couldn't afford the effects.
Whoa.
But so they split, and they're inevitably confronted by the husband, and just to hurry things along. Basically, he has to go to their coffin. Now, Carmilla does move about in the daylight. She seems a little sensitive to it. She likes to wear the hoods, though, like I said, they're really not like thick or anything. So I guess when that story was written, vampires did walk in daylight. That was a thing that, Bram
Hmm.
Stoker kind of introduced, and then they flirted with it. He kind of was ambiguous about it in the novel. And then later writers, all were like, yes, absolutely, they can't stand being in daylight at all. And then in modern times, people tried to kind of get around it and like in Near Dark, where they like spray their van completely black, all the windows, and we're like all these things.
I
Um,
love Near Dark. Yeah.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, we covered that.
Great film.
We'll cover that last Halloween on our vampire stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it is. And so this one goes against the lore in that sense, but she does have a coffin, and basically it is the coffin that was down there in the beginning of the movie that we assumed
Hmm.
had the dead Carmilla, but when he comes upon it, it's when he first comes upon it, he had seen her resting, and it was the day before, and she had the lavender, you know, thing on. So after these guys have been murdered and they've confronted him, he goes to find them, and I think what maybe they're implying is that she can move about in dusk. And the scenes are shot, they're day for night shots. I mean, they're not night shots at all. But
Hmm.
um for some reason she has to go back, or maybe she just loves being in that coffin. But it seems like it is true to vampire lore. Is when she's in that coffin, she goes into a deep sleep, like a very deep
Hmm.
sleep. So since he knew that already, when he finds a coffin, he's like, hmm.
So does Carmela get out of the? But she comes out of the trap. Does Susan get her out of that trap?
Somehow, well, you don't see that happen, but yes,
Okay.
yeah, that's an ellipsis, as they call it in scenes in movies. You
Yeah.
just after they kill the hunter, who knows? My theory is she just drank a bunch more of Susan's blood and just got strong
Got free. Got
to it.
strong and got free. Oh
Yeah, it
yeah. They
started to
could do anything
heal.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so they're in the coffin together, naked, and they're both in the deep sleep. And
Hmm.
so, he's going to pull a Van Helsing. But what's strange is he uses his shotgun, and it's very violent, but you don't see any wounds. But he like basically he closes the coffin and riddles it with like, I mean, he runs out of bullets. He reloads. I mean, he shoots the coffin probably 30 times, and blood is seeping out. So I don't know if they were silver bullets or wooden bullets, or he just thought bullets would kill them because they're vulnerable in their deep sleep. They don't go into any of that lore. You have to leave it totally up to the viewer. So hardcore vampire lore people are going to argue about this movie. I'm sure Mark probably did when it came out, but that contradicts Dracula and that way all. I notice those things, but I don't get bent out of shape, and I certainly don't go on the internet and get in arguments about it like people do.
Go
Um,
into forms.
yeah, and
Yeah.
apparently they're dead, but the twist is that the little girl comes to him and she says she says something like they are immortal, they cannot die. That's the first time that kind of idea has even been spoken in the movie. And he's kind of, you've always thought the little girl's sweet, but she's a little weird. And
Hmm.
so she opens her palms and she's wearing the rings now. So off camera, they vampirized her also. And there were,
Okay.
you did notice she was progressively acting weirder, but it's kind of like one of those things that you have to watch the movie more than one time to
So
really
is it like
notice.
we have a little daughter now? They make a
Well,
little
and
vampire
she
daughter.
she offers herself to him because she apparently does not want to be a vampire. She
Hmm.
doesn't want to be an eternal 8-year-old. Like she doesn't want to be like
Oh,
the character in Interview with the Vampire, which was
yeah.
written 2 years later. And so she asks him to shoot her in the head. I mean, she doesn't ask her verbally, but she shows her the rings, and and then she bows down. She gestures the shotgun. He looks pretty stoic about it. He's not angry at her, but neither is he going, "Oh my God, I'm going to kill a child." Again, most movies, one of those two reactions. So he was kind of stolid about it. Like, it's a vampire. Now I know they exist. This is what I got to do.
Hmm.
And so he does it and picks up the dagger, and then the movie's over, except for a headline which says "Man arrested for cutting the hearts out of 3 women in Castle."
Wow.
Well, the
Yeah.
2 women and a girl, but it's just said 3 females. But um,
Hmm.
so obviously no one's going to believe him. And did that do the trick? I mean, obviously he felt from what the little girl said that they had to have further, but they don't, again, cut their hearts out. This guy's not like Van Helsing. He's not like studied. He probably doesn't know cut the head off and bury the head in the body in 2 different locations and scatter the ashes. It's like, I'm doing the best I can, man.
He's
But
just real, down to earth
yeah,
guy.
and you think that he's gonna get off, like he's the villain, and it's kind of a bait and switch. I wouldn't call him a hero either. He's kind of a hero by default because the 2 guys who are kind of sort of heroic killed off by Carmilla. So you're
Hmm.
kind of left with the kind of brusque, pushy, sexually aggressive husband. And like I said, by the 15th viewing of this movie and watching it in Spanish now about 3 times, uh I don't think my original interpretation of him is very different. I don't see him as uh someone preying on an 18-year-old bride and like being rough with her and hurting her because she seems orgasmic when he it's like if it's hurting that much she would not be orgasmic. And
Hmm.
but the turning point is when she meets Carmilla because that's Carmilla's worldview. So as a
Hmm.
viewer, it depends on your worldview. If you're a woman who hates all men, whether you're a lesbian or not, you'll be like, "Yeah, Carmilla, kill that fucking husband." And the frenzy of the way they act when they try to kill him, and they don't manage to kill him like in the dream, but they talk to her and just like, "Destroy him, destroy him," and in Spanish, it's really awesome. And you're just kind of like, "Wow, she really fucking hates men, dude." And so yeah, it's interesting because I've seen a lot of lesbian vampire movies, and I don't see that kind of level of misandry. I guess that I think that means the same thing as misogyny, but against men. I don't see that level of misandry in most of them.
To be fair, I think it's probably very realistic.
Well, yeah, from her point of view, it probably is. I mean, but
So
from
it's
the
honest.
vampire's point of
It's
view, it
honest,
is.
It's
Sure.
honest. Not that I condone
Right.
misandry. I
No, I
don't.
like the fact that it has that element and more
But
than
that's
some of
kind
the
of
other
honest, I
movies. Yeah.
suppose.
It's kind of like bringing another subtext to the surface. Because you could
Yeah.
try to read that in some of the other movies, but invariably, a lot of the lesbian vampires kill men and women indiscriminately, so it,
It
it
is part of the games that people play.
mm,
I have
mm,
seen people, women who love other women, try to turn straight women over to the lesbian
right.
side by saying that men
And that's this
are
whole
pigs or
metaphor.
whatever.
That's
Yeah.
what La Fanu planted in the seeds of our culture that has sprouted as
Hmm.
one of the greatest. I mean, probably the greatest archetype or trope of vampires is Dracula. The way he is and the way he preys on people. But the next greatest one is definitely the Carmilla one, the female who, yes, comes and woos the innocent woman away from the horrible man, who may or may not even
Hmm.
be horrible. But like I said, it's
No,
in many
might have
movies,
a might
many.
have a shadow sexual side. Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Hmm,
but it doesn't matter anyway to Carmilla because she just wants what she wants and she's going to get it.
right, right.
So
And
by hook or by crook.
So, okay,
No.
we're gonna wrap up this one, and we're gonna be back with more vampire hijinks very soon. Probably Rhiannon will be discussing a film very intimately linked to the Blood Spatter Bride. So, before we go, remember to like and subscribe, and help support the channel. We really need it. We really appreciate you, and thanks for watching.
And it's true that we cannot see that far behind. If we looked all the way in the past, we'd go blind. In the night, from the stars as they've all lived their lives, and the light that they gave as they burned and then died.